and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. If you don't already know the breaking news, there has been a mass shooting out in California. Top headlines on Drudge. They came prepared to do what they did and that they were on a mission. Slaughter at social services facility. Manhunt. Heavily armed suspects at large. Search for SUV that fled scene. Report men dressed in ski masks and military gear. And they also have 3 good feeds to some live feeds. Active shooter drills every month at Inland Regional Center. And it's up to 14 dead, 14 injured right now. And this is in Bernardino, California. Have one here from Truth in Media that says reports of 20 victims wounded. 1 to 3 possible shooting suspects is what Sheriff's Department told CNN, but that was at 12:28 p.m. Pacific. But it says here, Reuters, a manhunt was underway for up to 30 suspects who shot as many as 20 people, some of them fatally, at a holiday party at a social services agency in the Southern California city of San Bernardino. Authorities said San Bernardino Police Lieutenant Richard Wahi told local NBC television network affiliate there were multiple facilities, and a reporter for that channel said he saw the bodies of 3 victims following the shooting rampage. MSNBC also reported that law enforcement authorities had confirmed that 3 deaths. The San Bernardino Fire Department said in a Twitter post that it was responding to reports of 20 victims. San Bernardino in some 60 miles east of Los Angeles. A police spokeswoman told the Los Angeles Times that the suspects were heavily armed and possibly wearing body armor, and CBS reported that a bomb squad was on the scene trying to defuse what was believed to be an explosive device. President Barack Obama was briefed on the attack and reiterated calls for stronger gun laws. We should come together in a bipartisan basis at every level of government to make these shootings rare as opposed to normal. Funny, funny coming from this guy's mouth. Agents for the FBI and U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives were dispatched to the scene to assist local law enforcement in the investigation. Representatives for the two agencies said the shooting took place at the Inland Regional Center, one of the 21 facilities set up by the state and run under contract by nonprofit organizations to serve people with developmental disabilities, said Nancy Lundgren, spokesman for the California Department of Developmental Services. And that's out of Truth and Media, and there's more in that. Truthandmedia.com. Excuse me. I have another one here. Give me a second while it loads up. Trying to bookmark some of these, that way I don't have so many windows open. This one was from RT. 20 shooting victims in California active shooter situation. San Bernardino Fire Department. And it has the actual tweet there, which says SBFD units responding to reports of 20 victim shooting incident in 1300 block of South Waterman, and they are working to clear a scene, which then turns into basically containing Doug Saunders, PD SWAT on scene, San Bernardino PD SWAT on scene. Pictures, they got their armored vehicles. And this other one did not want to come up. And it said that firefighters are now setting up a triage center to assist the victims shot in the mass casualty incident. KNBC reported law enforcement agencies are working to evacuate people from the Inland Regional Center, Doug Saunders tweeted. Last Friday, a shooter killed 3 and injured 9 people at Planned Parenthood Clinic in Colorado Springs. And we'll try to keep you updated on that. I'm going to get into a Ron Paul Liberty report. Just give me a second here. And we'll take this and we'll kind of lead into some other articles with this whole climate change thing. Obama over in Paris, remarks he's made, and this climate issue. We'll get to it, but this is COP21 climate action or pushing a hoax.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel McAdams is with me today. It's nice to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good, Daniel. There's a major conference going on in Paris. It looks like Paris is always in the news, major terrorist attack, but now there may be another attack on the taxpayers on what's going on now, because all the leaders, all the important people of the world are there to talk about, the next greatest threat in the world, and that we have to address it. And, of course, that's the urgent and growing threat from climate change. It used to be global warming, but since they can't prove global warming, it's climate change. But the big switch that I've seen here, it's not surprising that since everybody wants national security, they say that it's a growing threat to national security because of global weather changes. And that to me is interesting, because they rationalize that if you don't, there's going to be a lot of weather changes, and this will affect the military. But in fact, they even use the argument that if you have weather changes, what you really need is more military in order to combat it. But they don't consider the fact that the biggest user of fossil fuels is the Pentagon. And yet they're going to say, well, there's global warming, it's causing problems, there's going to be floods, and our responsibility is to go around the world, be the world's policeman. So that's our number one obligation. And therefore, if we can't move around and take care of all these problems, it's going to be a threat to national security. That to me is a bit of a stretch, but I think there'll be a lot of people will fall for this and think, well, anything that's for national security, this is going to be very important. This whole issue, though, bugs me, because I think it's so distorted on terrifying people about weather changes. But if they look at history, geologic history, even before there were any significant human beings on the Earth, the variations in temperatures were much, much greater. You had ice ages and hot ages and everything else. It looks to me that if you look at nature and what has happened, I would say the radical changes have been smoothed out. Matter of fact, climate change is sort of enjoyable. When winter's ended, we all enjoy the spring. When the summer ends, we enjoy the fall. And yet they still turn it into a monstrous problem. But right now, I think they're on the short end of making their case, the people who want to terrify everybody. Because, take, for instance, they say, what causes all these bad storms? Not global warming, bad storms. Well, go to Florida. They haven't had a significant hurricane hit them in 10 years. So, I think this use of it for national security is one thing, but some of them even want to invite this issue of terrorism to it. That somehow it's connected to terrorism.
Yeah, this is the pro-climate change people want to frame it as a zero-sum game, that you either are with them or you're a climate denier. You deny that there's any change, and I don't think any rational person would deny, if we study history and geologic history, that there is change over the years. The question is whether they're right that our activities cause it, and whether they're right that our doing certain other activities will decrease it. But, it's interesting. We looked at a Gallup poll taken last year about the priorities of Americans, the things that they're concerned about. And of 15 things, climate change was second to last. People just don't care a lot about it. They're not worried about it. And so, as you point out, what do they do to get people ginned up for this conference? They tied it to terrorism. You had Bernie Sanders said climate change is directly related to the rise of global terrorism. Obama says climate change, serious threat to global security, an immediate risk to our national security. Kerry's blamed the whole crisis in Syria on climate change. They had a couple of bad harvests, and that's why everything went south. It wasn't because of our intervention. It wasn't because of Assad must go. It's because they didn't have rain for a couple of years.
What's interesting is they do use economics in their bad economic policy from this horrible weather is the reason people, resort to terrorism and military operations. But the whole thing is, these are the clowns who don't have the vaguest idea what a healthy economy is all about, and what happens when you have a healthy economy, how starvation was stopped, how even the early years in our history, how starvation was a problem and all of a sudden it ceased once they accepted private property rights. So they never talk about that. And here Sanders is out there, who's a socialist, who creates all all the policies that create poverty and weak economy. So I think there is a significant relationship to these very, very poor nations, and they having these vicious dictators that we've, influenced and make our puppets. And the people get angry at it because I think, economics is a driving force for people to have revolution. But the whole idea that we need more government is the reason they should be looking for more freedom to find out if they want to connect it. But obviously, their goal is to conflate the two issues.
So as you point out, if climate change and economy are important, one of the goals of this conference is to reduce economic activity that produces greenhouse gases or things of the like. Things like the American coal industry will be gone and this sort of thing. But how would you see, if they have their way and we reduce our economic activity to boost the earth, what would that do to our economy? What would you?
Well, first I'll make a positive prediction. The people will be so angry they're going to ignore everything the government does, and sometimes they get that way. But no, if this goes through, and most likely there will be a burden, and it would collide. They would come together with the natural correction that has to come, that has not, worked its way out. It tried to eliminate all the malinvestment and debt in 2008 and 9, but that wasn't permitted. Now that burden is much, much greater. So if the correction has to come and the liquidation of debt has to come, at the same time they say the solution is more government, more regulations, and more subsidies to a whole industry. The industry that deals with global weather changes is a $1.5 trillion industry. And a lot of it, if not most of it, comes through taxes. And, people get grants. They get to do, promote certain alternatives. They feel the market is totally absent from it. So, and they pretend if the government pays for it, and they borrow the money or print the money, there's really not that much cost.
It's free.
So I think it's would be a devastating effect to the economy. And the two will come together. Matter of fact, they're together already. The economy is weak, and there are even Republicans that understand that super over-regulated EPA is very damaging to the economy, and that made that much worse.
Well, here's another thing you've always been concerned about. We read from this new plan they hope to have a signed deal after this conference, and with 40,000 people attending for 2 weeks at how many millions of dollars, they'll probably walk away with something. But one of the points is that, this is different from the previous ones, because the previous ones they call a top-down approach, where nations would agree globally on a certain standard. This one they say is different because it's bottom-up. Nations will decide on a plan individually for themselves and bring it to the UN. But here's the kicker, and this goes into what you've been saying for years and years. Parts of the deal must be legally binding. So a supranational entity now will have legal control over the U.S. You can't be too crazy about that.
It's obviously an attack on national sovereignty, and that, of course, undermines our laws and undermines our Constitution, which we've been doing, for a long time. So I think part of this whole effort is to justify world government. Whether just the war on terrorism is a big issue. It's not, criminality. 130 people being killed, pretty disastrous. But it isn't the justification for a total world government, which is usually the cause of so many problems that we have. So you come along with problems like this, and we do have a problem. I think there's a significant problems in parts of the world, and we have had it in this country, and that is pollution. Because I happen to have lived in a city where pollution was horrible, and that was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which got cleaned up before the EPA. But pollution is something, because I see it as a violation of property rights. And I imagine when there's a cloud hanging over a city, it might alter the temperature under that city. But I have not bought into this whole thing that anything that produces CO2, that CO2 has become a poison. I didn't learn that in medical school. Lots of normal, natural things are poison when they're excessive, but that isn't what the case is here. Even pollution, I don't think, is just CO2. There's a lot of pollutants in there, in the air that does this. But this to me, whether it's terrorism or whether it's the war on global warming and climate change, I think it's just more of effort to have world government. And you talk about whether it's top down or bottom up, and they say, oh, this will be bottom up and we can represent ourselves. But what was our Constitution supposed to do? We were supposed to be almost essential independent nations, but that has been long gone. In an independent nation, the states should have had state sovereignty. But now the feds always overrule. So what we say so often has so little effect on the government. But what I see coming is the national governments, especially ours, will become so inept that people are going to act on their own. They're getting together now. States get together and say, we're not going to enforce these particular laws they're challenging. And they're saying, we're not going to, have the federal government deal with where people are going to live, and they're going to subsidize people to come in and move in. That's what I think. But there's a bit of rebellion there. So, yes, it's very bad, this move to world government and authoritarianism. And when they see a problem, they just give us more of what caused the problem. But I think that you pointed out in the polling, American people aren't staying awake at night worrying about climate change and the temperature. They're worried about other things, and rightfully so. I think economics was on top of the list.
Number one.
Jobs. This is what it is. And this is what these people aren't dealing with. They don't want to talk about, well, how do you have jobs? Well, you get rid of the Federal Reserve, you balance the budget, you quit spending, you get the government out of our lives, you emphasize the principle of personal liberty and property rights and voluntary contracts, and just get out of the way, and people will have jobs, and the economy will boom. But they don't talk about that. They just talk about more and more, and always the attack is a sacrifice of personal liberty. But people who want world government aren't too interested in yours and my liberty.
Well, the people that go to these conferences are going to create a lot of jobs, very high-paying jobs for the elites. But the coal miners and people that are working down here, they're going to be out of jobs.
And they'll get poorer. That's why, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. If you still have a form of the market and you're on the right side of things, you get bailed out and you get the contracts. And the middle class and the poor, just look at the number of people, young people who are still living at home because they can't get a job and can't take care of themselves. And they think that, guys like Sanders thinks they're going to correct that, even though he says, yeah, that's a problem. So what we need is more of it. We need more spending. So that is our fight. This is the fight that we have, and it's been not new. It's been around for a long time, and that is individual liberty versus the state. And I think there's a healthy debate going on. I think our side of the argument is in the driver's seat. I think they're in the political driver's seat, and they have a lot of clout. But they're going to run out of issues. They're losing their clout. They're going to lose the money. They're going to lose control, whether they think they can drive it by, stirring up fear over terrorism that essentially is non-existent in this country. And if we just had a different foreign policy, we could solve that problem. The people are going to wake up, mainly because big government is totally inept. And they will fail, and that is why we should be prepared. We should be prepared by individuals, families, and local municipalities to be able to live together and work our way out of this. But most important is the issue of the ideas that we live by, the ideas and principles of personal liberty and property. This would go a long way to solve the problem. These kind of conferences, they're deadly in support of the tyrants and the authoritarians who just want bigger government. And that's what we have to expose. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, Bill Nye came out and was talking about, the terrorism's tied to climate change. Yep. It's one of those things that it really is about a world government or a more centralized global government, and it alone is not the sole issue. You can also see it in Agenda 21, which you can say this is kind of um, a limb off of Agenda 21. But there's other agendas, definitely, when you look at global banking. There's a lot of different things. They can't just go push, say, we're going to make a Western alliance government that you don't get a vote for. What they want to do is get everybody on multiple treaties, and what they'll do is they won't call them treaties. They'll pass bills in Congress, and before you know it, you have no say in all these laws being made until the nation decides to rise up. But we see quite a few rise up. We see what happened with Greece. They had a chance to get away from the euro. The same tactics that got Europe in the situation that they're in are the same things they're doing here. And the United Nations and these conferences all play a part in getting the laws passed that are decided by people that have nothing to do with your country. Now, being a libertarian, I go, well, most, not all, but a lot of libertarians talk about local governing when it comes to scaling back from where we're at now. Let the communities decide. And even if you don't believe in the country America, you see what they're doing, and it's beyond that. It's Western world. Sounds more like a, theme park. Now, under global governance, their main goals are going to be fighting over centralizing power structure within themselves, which means that everybody becomes a target for them to throw others under the bus. False flags will happen under that type of a control system, and they'll be blamed on others, and they'll use them to further take your rights away. And we see it over and over. We see it locally. We see it, internationally. And look what's going on in France right now. They are just truly out of control. I have one here from Anti-Media, the antimedia.org. France makes major shift toward fascism in wake of Paris terror attacks. Paris, France, ahead of planned United Nations climate talks, the French government is utilizing emergency laws put in place after November Paris terror attack to hold climate activists under house arrest. Immediately after the November terror attacks, the French government declared a state of emergency based on a rarely used 1955 law that allows the state to conduct warrantless searches of private property, impose curfews, restrict public gatherings and movement of people, confiscate weapons at will, and take over the press. Legal activist Joel Domerjoud said that he had been served with a restraining order describing him as a principal leader of the ultra-left movement, a title he disputes only a couple hours after a judge refused to hear an appeal against the ban on the climate demo Domerjoud had petitioned for. A neighbor informed Domerjad that a swarm of police were lined up the stairs waiting for him to arrive home. I feel angry about it because I think they made a big mistake, Domerjad said. They weren't looking for people like us activists, or if they were, it shows that they can target people for no reason at all, and our civil liberties are in danger. On Saturday, Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve confirmed that the French government had used the recently enacted emergency laws to place at least 24 Greenpeace activists under house arrest. Cazeneuve claimed the activists are suspected of planning violent protests at the talks, which kicked off Sunday, a day ahead of the opening ceremony, and is scheduled to run through December 11th. These 24 people have been placed under house arrest because they have been violent during demonstrations in the past and because they have said they would not respect the state of emergency. Meanwhile, Greenpeace France Director Jean-François Julliard says the activists under house arrest had never committed violent acts. Nor had they ever been charged with anything. We have the feeling that the government wants to stifle criticism from the militants, but they are going about it the worst possible way. And sorry, I think I have a update here. Let me get to it. Well, I'll keep reading here. Possible way this is repression, Julliard said on BFM television. Several sources claim the officers also raided 3 squats in Paris and more across the country, seizing computers, documents, and personal items. Regardless of the threat of house arrest, some climate protesters still took to the streets. According to the Interior Minister, more than 300 people have been placed on house arrest since the declaration of state of emergency just over 2 weeks ago. So really, that right there is where a lot of these type of attacks will be used as propaganda. Breaking news out of Fox News, just got across my phone, says police stop SUV, shots fired in pursuit of possible suspects in San Bernardino, California mass shooting. And now let's try to get to this one. Was out of Truth and Media. France applies emergency anti-terror laws to confine activists. Ahead of planned United Nations climate talks, the French government is utilizing emergency laws put in place after November's Paris terror attacks to hold climate activists under house arrest. Immediately after the November terror attacks, the French government declared an emergency based on rarely used 55 law that allows the state to conduct warrantless searches. Well, basically, they're covering the same exact thing here. And it basically goes over the same stuff that really just shows that we are in a state where fear is easily, before people would be like, yeah, whatever, I got my gun. Now it's like, we need your protection, and they're willing just to give their civil liberties up. There's something really almost sick about it when you watch it happen. And then while all this is going on, we also see a build up to a World War III. What would that do? Well, under a state of war, when people actually do feel that if they don't fight, and we lose the war, we'll be under worse standards. Also, in turn, puts you under, just look at the South. They were talking about, states' rights, and civil liberties, and, oh, well, not for, certain people, but that was only a portion of the South that agreed with slavery. But then, it was much more about, constitutional state rights over federal. And you look at it, the South end up basically putting a lot of martial law type things into effect, and a lot of laws that abridge civil liberties, because in time of war you give up civil liberties. Well, what does that lead to? Well, it too can lead to internment, kind of like World War II here in America. When the country is in so much turmoil where we already see rights being given up, in a state of war, a war that hits more closely to home, that you start seeing things that reminisce more like World War II, World War I, that can actually further that agenda along. I think a lot of people forget that sometimes. So civil liberties will be under even more threat in a state of global war. Now, what would World War III look like? Well, there's some people that claim the Cold War was World War III. We would actually be going into World War IV. Others disagree. But let's say that the Cold War, in a way, was a world war, which I think it wasn't. It could come in multiple forms. This is where we're seeing, the true global presence coming into effect. Most of the Western, European, American, you have South America, a lot of Southern American countries kind of going with Russia, China, and Russia might not always get along, but they will work together to push this world currency towards the yen, or yuan, whatever you pronounce it as. We see a global shifting, which in turn can potentially lead to a global war. Definitely, once one country starts going overboard. what we're going to see with Syria, I don't know if that's going to be the major, point. Well, if the U.S. backs out, will Russia expand their war in the Middle East, and then we decide to step in, and that create that global, where does it go? Where does it start? I don't know. What I do see is a global tension building, and it can reach a boiling point very quick. And I'm seeing tensions rise rather than level off. And I do think we're on that, precipice. I have one here from AMTV. Why Syria signals World War III. And I'll let you get Christopher Green's take on this from AMTV.
Please visit our sponsor, BattleBox.com. That's BattleBox. Take a look at these, and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. It is, of course, December 1st, 2015. Amazing how quickly this year is coming to a close. And, we spend all of our time with our family and friends, and all of a sudden, it's January 1st, 2016. And these are very interesting times to be alive. Folks, the last video that I worked on, we talked about, which was largely predicted. I mean, we talked about this in dozens of videos prior to the event through NATO, through Turkey, coincidentally before Turkey Day, that shot down a Russian jet. And we talked about this, how the crisscrossing of these operations in Syria, with Russian forces flying their own air campaigns, fighting ISIS, and then the U.S. also using its own campaigns, arming, funding the same terrorists on the ground, that all this crisscrossing would eventually result, potentially, in some kind of accident or an escalation that would lead to war. And it's exactly what happened. We had Turkey blatantly, through NATO, and I think this was a planned event. I think the headline should have read that the United States shot down, through Turkey, a NATO ally, this Russian jet to basically egg on the Russian bear. A geopolitical chess move to see what Russia would do. How will Putin respond to this event? And as I said in the video that we reported about a week ago before Turkey Day, again, coincidentally, Turkey shooting down this Russian jet prior to the Thanksgiving holiday, that Vladimir Putin would not react overtly to this situation because he's a far superior intellect. He's a far better geopolitical chess mover than Barack Obama, the puppet and the people that he works for, that it would be a covert move by Putin.
How is Putin, a very smart, tactical, geopolitical chess player, going to respond to this? And believe me, he will respond aggressively. I don't think he's going to respond overtly. I think he's going to respond covertly.
So I think we're still waiting for this to pan out. There's been a couple things that have happened. Putin has instituted sanctions on Turkey recently, and there's not going to be the free flow of travel of Turkish citizens into Russia anymore, and vice versa, as it was before. So there's been some things that have been said. Putin has made a statement. This came out, I believe, today, within the last 24 hours, that Turkey is purchasing oil from ISIS, from IS, or the Islamic State, which now it's, it's gone from Al-Qaeda, and then it became ISIS, and then it was ISIL, and now it's just Islamic State. CNN just kind of snowballs these words into the public consciousness. Again, ISIS didn't even exist like a year ago. It really just was a creation of Al-Qaeda, armed, funded by the United States federal government, to basically destabilize this part of the world. I mean, we've seen this in history, guys, countless times. I was actually watching a documentary, kind of this long feature set, of Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And they talked about how basically Teddy, through covert CIA operations before he was actually elected to the vice presidency and then later became president, that the United States had been arming, backing, funding the terrorists in Cuba on the ground to destabilize Cuba, to overthrow the government, what they called the regime. Again, this is all propaganda, the terminology. They'll always say regime of the governments they want to overthrow, and then it's a government if we support it. It's just semantics. My point being, they've been doing this for years, right? They've been doing this for arguably generations, right? The United States, through its imperialism, basically destabilize and arms terrorists on the ground to overthrow other rightful sovereign governments. It's exactly what's happened in Syria. It's exactly what's happened in the Middle East. It's exactly what's happened in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. This is just U.S. imperialism. This is the U.S. acting really quite illegally, with bold-face acuity, if that maybe is the right term, to basically take over this part of the world. And we've seen it in history before, and now it's been and made up a large part of our current history over the last decade or so. You know, as we look at the administrations of George W. Bush and, of course, Barack Obama. So Putin, back to the Russian jet being shot down, will act, in my opinion, covertly, not overtly. And I think, personally, in my humble opinion, the act of NATO shooting down this plane was a CIA-backed covert U.S. operation. Basically, the United States, the powers that be, those sitting in the boardroom smoking those cigars, made the decision and planned the event way in advance and basically gave Turkey the green light to shoot down this plane. Because, again, this is a geopolitical chess move. And nobody's denying anymore. Notice how the U.S. government isn't denying. The mainstream media isn't denying. Yeah, they have armed these terrorists on the ground. They are responsible largely for creating ISIS, funding ISIS, and creating this instability in the Middle East that has rocked, quite literally, and roiled the greater Levant, which makes up Iraq and Syria today. So all of this is unraveling. There has been some geopolitical shifts, actually, in the last 72 hours with the yuan, the IMF actually backing it as a world reserve currency. I mean, again, this is supposed to be conspiracy theory, guys, right? You know, we talked about this 5 years ago. The yuan is now, the IMF just approved this because it's been under a lot of pressure with the establishment of its counterpoints through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in the East, AIIB, the counterpoint and equivalent of the Western-backed dominated loan shark that makes up the IMF and World Bank. The IMF and Christine Lagarde, the head, who replaced Dominique Strauss-Kahn through a covert conspiracy in and of itself. If you guys want to watch those videos, just go back several years. I explained that in detail. Have now agreed to put the yuan into this SDR basket that makes up the special drawing rights, which is used basically through the IMF as the loan shark that indebts nations around the world. So what this means, the inclusion of the yuan, means that the yuan, its demand will increase as a currency, the renminbi, over time, just like the dollar has enjoyed really unfairly, arguably, over the last century or so, this domineering status as world reserve. So there's actual currency shifts occurring right now, real geopolitical events taking place that, of course, all tie into the war front, this war propaganda and this war campaign. And it's only going to escalate. And that's why as we approach this new year, 2016, we're only building to the future conflict. We're only building to the future war. And again, this plays into oil prices, the instability in the oil market at these multi-decade lows, having crashed some 50%. Of course, all of this engineered by Saudi Arabia, which has largely been the swing producer of OPEC for some time now, basically giving the green light and driving so much supply to the market that it basically drives oil prices into the gutter. And the mainstream media will call this a conspiracy that the West would collude with its ally, Saudi Arabia, that we didn't invade post September 11, 2001, even though they were responsible for it. According to the own declassified information, it was actually Saudi Arabian terrorists on board the plane had basically colluded with the U.S. and its Western counterparts to drive oil into the gutter to hurt Russia and Iran and places like Venezuela, which are experiencing extreme economic turmoil, and some of these places experiencing arguably hyperinflation right now. And the mainstream media will call that a conspiracy. Yeah, it's just a conspiracy that allies, friends, would actually get together to hurt the enemy nations they're at war with. How's that a freaking conspiracy? That's just what enemies do. You know, the U.S. is fighting a propaganda new Cold War with Russia. They've demonized them like the next Hitler. All of this is a part of the propaganda war. And it's not a conspiracy, just like it wasn't a conspiracy that the yuan will become the new world reserve currency, which it just did. And it's been added to this basket. It's just reality. But this constant spin job by the mainstream media, the constant BS being spoon-fed to us, is all a part of this psychological warfare, again, to dumb down the masses, to push the war agenda. Notice that post the Paris attacks, just like we predicted, post the engineered migrant crisis, post the active destabilization of these parts of the world, like Syria and Iraq and the greater Levant, in the Middle East, only shifted all of these migrants over into places like France, which brought terror with them because they kept the borders wide open intentionally to justify the wars. It only created more public support for a war in this part of the world that nobody supported before, but now they do because people got shot up in cafes. And nobody's discounting, these tragic events or the tragedy of these events, but it is, of course, all been engineered by these people. Again, no one's even denying. The mainstream media is not denying. Intelligence here in the United States is no longer denying. Western nations are no longer denying that they have been arming terrorists on the ground. They just call them moderate terrorists, but really they're just terrorists. I mean, again, there's no difference between the moderate terrorists cutting people's heads off and the extreme terrorists cutting people's heads off. They're both cutting people's heads off. They're both terrorists. They're both killing people. They're both maiming, murdering, and raping women and children. There is no difference. But again, this has been a part of the U.S.'s historical track record as an imperialist nation to basically create this kind of instability and these destabilizing events anywhere in the world they see fit. You see, if the United States doesn't view these other member nations as its puppet or as a tool it can use, a lot of times they'll build these countries up and then they'll tear them down, or they'll build up these terrorist organizations like they have done with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and then they'll tear them down. If they don't view it as serving their own purposes, they'll just take these countries out. And they'll do it through covert operations, which later become public, as is the case with ISIS, which now all of this, of course, is factual information, not a conspiracy, but admitted. And again, they'll just do this time and time again. And it's amazing how the American people, Europeans, are just being goaded into this new war. I mean, people really are just idiots. I mean, let's be honest with each other, folks. People are just plain dumb, being goaded once again into another great crisis and another great war, which has only been caused through the instability and the destabilization effort that begun as a covert operation and is now right in front of all of our faces and plain for the world to see. And they want you to fight on the front lines. So again, this only builds to war. Expect more accidents, like I believe a planned event, but as the media sees it and pitches it to the American people and Europeans around the world, these accidents that only catalyze and lead to war, as was the case with the downing of this Russian jet. I fully expect Vladimir Putin to aggressively act covertly in response to this, and I am carefully watching his next move. Again, the East is no longer the rising East. They are just the dominating superpower of the world, now being included, the yuan being included as the world reserve currency. Expect demand for China goods, for their currency, for their economy, only to pick up steam in the coming years, and expect the United States, as it's already been doing, to fall from grace. And of course, the only reset button to this, all engineered by the West through egregious spending and massive amounts of debt, and this funny money that's been created through a private, criminally run Federal Reserve that's created an upside-down pyramid scheme that is now collapsing, only leads us to the next great conflict and the next great world war. I'm Christopher Green. Get this video everywhere. Make it viral, hard-hitting in your face. Put your comment, question, suggestion in the comment box below. I'll try to respond. Peace.
Christopher Green on YouTube, AMTV on YouTube. You'll find them. AMTV is the channel. Christopher Green. And you can also amtvmedia.com. Now, live update. They said that it's one confirmed dead suspect. They have the vehicle stopped Um, I believe it. They said one suspect is laying on the ground. Um, right now, they have two armored vehicles pinning the SUV in. All the windows are shot out, and they're using a Bobcat style machine, heavily armored, with a platform on the front with a armor shield, so they can get closer. Looks like they were using a camera on a pole to look inside the SUV, and that's what we know as of now. And I'll try to keep you updated on that throughout the broadcast here. Now, the yuan, yen, whatever you call it, being accepted by the IMF, it's a big thing for the fact that now it really is in line to contend with the U.S. dollar, which they have built a alliance to do exactly that. And now they have basically validated that yuan, yen, yuan. So I think it's just now not if, but when the U.S. dollar is going to be replaced. And I think it's pretty evident to a lot of people. Okay. Let me go ahead and bring up this next article I had. And ISIS extremists celebrate shootings with America burning hashtag. That was in our headline on Drudge. Sorry, I'm having a little issue here. Here it is. And this was out of Yahoo News. Watch for U.S. recession, zero interest rates in China next year, Citi says. London Reuters. The outlook for the global economy next year is darkening with a U.S. recession and China becoming the first major emerging market to slash interest rates to zero, both potential scenarios, according to Citi. As the U.S. economy enters seventh year of expansion following the 2008-2009 crisis, the probability of recession will reach 65%, Citi rates strategists wrote in their 2016 outlook, published late on Tuesday. A rapid flattening of the bond yield curve towards inversion would be a key warning sign. The cumulative probability of a U.S. recession reaches 65% next year. Citi's rates strategists wrote in their 2016 outlook, published late Tuesday. It says curve inversion will likely come more quickly than the consensus thinks. Normally, short-dated yields such as 2-year yields are lower than longer-dated ones like 10-year yields, as investors demand a premium for taking on risks several years into the future. The curve has inverted before each of the last 5 U.S. recessions since the mid-1970s. In China, deflationary pressures and downside risk to growth will force Beijing to loosen physical policy, let the yuan depreciate, and perhaps become the first major emerging market economy to cut interest rates to zero, Citi said. I really thought that was pretty interesting that Citi has come out and said it in their little memo report. Now, I think we will see a total recession, which I think there's a lot of things that could possibly happen. There's another article out there. Texas secession effort surfaces again. Move to put on ballot. People are getting fed up. You have Obama group to call out climate change denier. Call me out. I'm not denying climate changes. I'm denying that if it was having radical changes before humans, wouldn't it say that maybe we aren't the cause of radical changes? Pollution and large corporations and their forestry projects where they take out whole forests in South America. But a lot of times those are also state-run corporations in those countries. So, and under UN watch, they do these things. So. Okay. I don't know what's going on here. Come on. Okay, I'm just ditching that article because it won't fully load for some reason. Now, when we talk about immigration, people go, I thought you were libertarian. Listen, I am. What I'm saying is this is a controlled, forced immigration with multiple angles being played here. And they are doing things for a reason. Now, the way you can see that is the manipulation with certain individuals that are willing to do some of the idiotic things they do, like in Black Lives Matter, being, used as a puppet without any true awareness. And we want people to become aware and independent and not under this cult mentality. Be a leader, not, just one of the herd being led to slaughter, basically, because you catch a lot of them making complete fools of themselves, definitely when having to answer questions. Now, this, in both instances, when they knowingly create a immigration crisis that allows for the infiltration by these radicals that they said that they were going to, assimilate into the refugees and get into all these Western countries. So they're creating that problem. Black Lives Matter, they're being brainwashed into creating these problems. And it'll eventually backfire. But right now, they have to protect and allow these radicals to run around, whether they're controlled, brainwashed, or whatnot. They need to allow that to happen to create fear, to create a instance where there will be a large amount of people that are going to save me, government, kissing the boot of their oppressor. That allows things like that to happen. One here, Black Lives Matter supporter who threatened to massacre 16 white students allowed back on campus. This out of Infowars.com by Paul Joseph Watson. A Black Lives Matter supporter who threatened to massacre 16 white students as part of a revenge attack for the shooting of Chicago teen Laquan McDonald has been allowed to return to campus by a federal judge. 21-year-old Jabri Dean was arrested on Monday after threatening to kill students and staff at the University of Chicago. Dean posted a message on social media over the Thanksgiving weekend, in which he laid out the details of his plan to carry out the racially motivated rampage. Quote, "This is my only warning," unquote, wrote Dean. Quote, "At 10 a.m. on Monday morning, I am going to the campus quad of the University of Chicago. I will be armed with a M4 carbine and 2 Desert Eagles, all fully loaded. I will execute approximately 16 white male students and or staff, which is the same number of times McDonald was shot or killed." Unquote. And quote, "I then will die killing any number of white policemen that I can in the process. This is not a joke. I am to do my part to rid the world of the white devils. I expect you to do the same," unquote, the Post stated. The threat led the University of Chicago to take the decision to close to the campus after consultation with FBI. Dean was released to his mother on Tuesday morning from the U.S. Dirksen Federal Courthouse, pending a charge of transmitting a threat in interstate commerce. However, U.S. Magistrate Judge Susan Cox has allowed him to attend class, according to reports, a privilege that presumably would not have been granted to a white student who had threatened to massacre over a dozen black people. Dean was given permission to return to campus under the justification that he had no weapons with which to carry out his planned attack. Bill Burton, a spokesman for UIC, declined to comment on whether the university would allow Dean to return or what disciplinary actions he would face, despite being infinitely more threatening than in the University of Missouri poop swastika, which prompted weeks of protests at colleges across the U.S. and lavish media attention. Dean's threat to massacre 16 students as part of Black Lives Matter revenge attack has attracted comparatively little press coverage. You can check that article out at Infowars.com. Black Lives Matter supporter who threatened to massacre 16 white students allowed back on campus. Now, people are like, yeah, and that's why we should start our white clubs, and that's the problem. That's exactly what it leads to, this really divisionary type ideology. You look at things that have happened in that black community with groups that have been radical, where they push, we need black this, black that, black this, we can't have mixed. It needs to be a black-owned company, or, what we see bleeding into mainstream when it comes to pushing a agenda. We see, you have to have all black movies. Basically every, movie that is one of the greats has to be remade somehow completely African American. No white people, or very little. All main characters have to be black. And it's saying that, it's saying two things. It's saying from a certain group of people that, we are going to be the dominant race over the whites. Basically, same ideology that, a lot of the white supremacists believe. And then you have the other ones that are just like, we want to have something that maybe our children might relate to. They look at things racially more than maybe the children do. A black girl sees a princess, she might not be going, it's a white princess, I can't be one. That, they're not looking at it that way. The older you get, the more you get brainwashed into thinking things like that. Child's probably looking at the princess no matter what color, Asian, Indian, Native American, European, whatever. They see a princess and they want to be like a princess. Now, again, those people that, well, you just want, a black role model. They have a, legit interest in it. The ones that are trying to push, we gotta try to be dominant over other races. In any race, you have those groups that we have to be dominant. You have Asians, whites, blacks, Hispanics, many people that we have to be the dominant race. But it's, again, extremist in all those groups. There is no dominant race. We all have idiots in our race, and we all have, great thinkers in our race. We all have, great builders in our races. A lot of it is region, culture, and war. Don't go, why don't they, have their own food system? Well, because we probably bombed it. We probably wiped out a lot of what was there. We always talk about climate change, and they don't talk about all the damage that war has done in a lot of countries. Vietnam, look at the carpet bombing. War, if anything, is a bigger polluter. Not saying that humans cause global warming. We know there's a lot of factors that are way beyond what humans do. And you know what? The earth will fix itself whenever it needs to, and it will be here long after humans. Definitely the rate we're going right now. Okay. Um, Talking about immigration, I wish I would have kind of moved along a little bit faster than I did. There's one clip that I was going to play earlier, but kind of rambled on about a couple things. I was only going to play a section of it in the middle, but if you get a chance, check out liberty.me on YouTube. Be probably the quickest way to find it. We the Individuals, Immigration, and IP. And check out that clip. It really gets into a lot of the deeper issue of immigration, and really the individual in a free society. And it's a really good clip. So I definitely want you to check that out. Now, what is going on? Sorry here. I don't know what's going on. Trying to restart my browser. I'm going to open up my other browser. Hopefully that one isn't going to give me a problem. Okay, here it comes. This was another Ron Paul Liberty Report. And this one was today's Ron Paul Liberty Report. And this is about spying. This is something that Rand Paul has actually fought against for a long time now. But this one's after Patriot Act reform, spying continues. And it's kind of like Common Core. You know, a lot of states came up with their own standards, literally taking the name and changing it and calling it their own Common Core standards. Same with Patriot Act. They reformed Patriot Act to do the same thing it already does. So here we go.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. We'll be visiting with one of our senior fellows from the Institute that's been working with us, Adam Dick, who also worked with us in the congressional office and did a key amount of work on civil liberties and a lot of other things that he did. But Adam, nice to have you with us today.
It's great to be with you.
Well, good. We want to talk about the so-called reform with the Patriot Act, and you've been following that very closely, even back when we were in Congress, because it's been such a violation of civil liberties, and there's been a lot of complaints, and we had a lot of attention. So we did put a lot of pressure on other members of Congress and the general population. They said, "Yeah, we have to reform this." But we also know that it's best to be cynical about reform. And just recently, you know, although it's been passed, it just went into effect this past weekend. And there were a lot of headlines that will, as far as I'm concerned, deceive the people a lot, because the headlines I see as propaganda. It says one headline in the Washington Examiner: NSA bulk surveillance to end Sunday. Well, maybe, and that's what we'll be talking to you about. But then there was another article, and I liked much better, and this came from Eurasia Review, and it picked up the article from the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, written by Adam Dick. Now, that headline was, "Despite what you may have heard, mass surveillance continues." So guess which side we're on, and I'd like you, Adam, to just sort of give the audience a summary. You've also followed closely, Judge Napolitano's comments on this, a real expert. But just sort of summarize this, where we were a year or two ago, and what happened in legislation, and what's this law that they passed? What do they call it? The USA Freedom Act. It's sort of like the Patriot Act. So just sort of give us a brief update on how this transpired.
So the Freedom Act is just like the Patriot Act in that it doesn't protect freedom, just like the Patriot Act is not patriotic. Talking about Judge Napolitano on Fox Business just this week, he explained that what's going on now is a farce and that nothing has changed. Under the USA Freedom Act, the NSA and other U.S. government agencies will continue to be able to do all the mass surveillance they did before. They can look for authority from another section of the Patriot Act, as well as from an executive order from George W. Bush. There's, at the same time, as Daniel pointed out, when the act passed the Senate on June 2nd of this year and was immediately signed by the president, the USA Freedom Act even extends to the telecommunications company immunity, so that people can't sue them for violations of privacy. So, that's just one of the ways that it even takes a step back from protecting freedom.
You probably read John Whitehead's article. We read John quite often from the Rutherford Institute, and he had a pretty hard-hitting column this week where he talked about, he agrees with you and the judge that this hasn't changed anything. It's quite deceptive. He referenced the executive order. I think it's the same one that you and the judge were talking about, 12333, authorizing the collection of Americans' data from surveillance as long as it's conducted on foreign soil. And what Whitehead pointed out is that the government is rerouting a lot of these communications just offshore, so it gets around the constitutional protections that Americans serve, saying, well, we're surveilling this from offshore. It's not from U.S. territory. So there are plenty of tricks like this. I think that they're playing down from the beginning, from calling, as you point out, the Freedom Act.
Right, and the tricks aren't just by the executive branch. It's the executive, the legislative, and judicial branch. They're all in on it. Looking back to March of 2013, before all these Edward Snowden revelations came back, James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, said in a committee hearing to a question by Ron Wyden, senator from Oregon, that the U.S. government wasn't collecting all this telecommunications information on millions of Americans. Then when the revelations come out, and the first thing you see the House and Senate intelligence leadership doing is trying to protect the program. Senator Feinstein was around saying how important it was, and almost immediately the House Intelligence Committee invites over people from the executive branch who are running the program to a committee hearing titled something along the lines of, why the mass surveillance is so great and why exposing it to the people is so bad and hurts our security. At the same time, looking over to the judiciary, the secret FISA courts, when they're asked to allow the U.S. executive branch to dig into people's personal information, their communications, they gave approval almost every single time over the years. So, whether it's the executive, the legislative, or the judicial branch, they've all been in on the farce.
I think our viewers, as well as we here at the Institute and on our channel here, realize that this is all a fake and a fraud, and yet we go through this ritual. I hope it's a little bit more than a ritual, but we go through this even though we know reform is not reform. We even know that they live outside the law. It's still so important to let people know what the law should be and is and why we should follow it, so that someday we will get true reforms. Because I am rather cynical about the whole thing, because having had the experience in Washington, they really don't care. And like Adam, you point out, all branches of government are against liberty. None of them really stand out. We're supposed to be protected by the people who were elected by the people. We're supposed to be protected by the president. We're supposed to be protected by the courts. We don't ever seem to get this protection. But what happens when there's a lack of respect for law? The Constitution, I got rebuked more than once in Washington for bringing the subject of that old-fashioned idea. But some people place a little bit of importance on the law, but the people in Washington don't. I mean, just look at it. Let's say they actually did what they said they did, and that they could not collect this data, and they couldn't force the phone companies to do their work. I mean, look at what they do. Do they follow the rules about war? No, they start wars anytime they want without proper permission. Whether it's the Constitution or the mandate that they can't do it without some type of congressional approval. So the War Powers Resolution was supposed to stop all that. They're not supposed to torture people. They have and probably will continue it. And so all these things continue. But I think that I don't want people to get discouraged because, and become too cynical about it, because this is a worthwhile project, because the only thing that we have to combat this are the ideas that we have, and there hopefully will be a day that liberty is more important than listening to the lies of those who are going to promise safety and financial security.
Well, one area for hope is if we look back to early after Snowden's revelations came out, Representative Justin Amash from Michigan proposed an amendment that was along the lines of the kind of legislative action that could actually succeed in stopping this mass surveillance. And what he was trying to do was deny funding. And that's a way that Congress, if it denied funding, it could absolutely make an impact here by removing the means by which the surveillance can occur. Now, that amendment came close to passing, but then a year later, along comes the USA Freedom Act and a PR campaign associated with it to take the momentum that was behind actually ending the program and shift it into support for a fake reform that actually allows it to continue. So if we want to succeed in stopping the program, I think Representative Amash was along the right lines. We have to say we're done funding it. And the funding for this black budget has grown immensely since September 11th, and people don't even know where it's spent on. There's tons of companies making money from it in the surveillance industrial complex, and that's what we need to do. We need to take away that funding, and that's really the way that we can make sure it doesn't continue.
That's a great point you make, Adam. That's almost the kind of the Hegelian dialectics that they take the momentum from the Snowden revelations and rechannel it into a synthesis of reform. And what that does is, of course, it marginalizes people like Dr. Paul and like the Institute. You become the extremists. Look, we have to take an incremental view. We're moving there. We're moving toward reform, which, of course, itself is sort of a Marxist idea. But if there's any doubt what the NSA feels about the Freedom Act, and you reminded us of this in your article, the head of the NSA, Michael Hayden, when announced what the Freedom Act was all about, he said, cool, meaning that he would continue. And, Adam, we've worked with the ACLU over the years, and we both, I know, have great respect for much of what they do. They're terrific on a lot of these issues. But they had quite a different spin on this, and I wonder how much of it is driven by the need to demonstrate progress to donors or what have you. But, they came out saying, NSA unplugged, the government finally stopped vacuuming up your phone records. And I think, there is a tendency to want to tell a good news story because when we do get the reform, it seems like doom and gloom. But, we've always felt, Dr. Paul has always felt that the best reform is to end the NSA. So there really is this sort of a tension between those of us, I think, who are on the same side. I know we're on the same side, but much different approaches.
Absolutely. One of the discouraging things is that some of our people who are identified as our allies do say things that help continue the surveillance. I know back when the revelations first came out, there was an article put out by two people who were associated with the Cato Institute that promotes itself as a pro-liberty and anti-big government organization. One of those writers was Roger Plon, who is in charge of constitutional department at the Institute. And the article was saying that the Patriot Act and the Section 215 surveillance is just fine because it was approved multiple times by Congress and had the support of the president and the judiciary. But at the same time, if you look at reality, the program as it operated was a total secret. So any approval wasn't really of the secret program. And at the same time, since when does a libertarian believe that something is right because the three branches of government have supported it? It can still be wrong. Plenty of the things the U.S. government does that are wrong have had the support of all three branches. But compounding the problem is that what happened was that Bill Kristol, the arch neocon, enemy of liberty, both in foreign policy and domestic policy, took that and said, look, even the libertarians agree with me. This program's great. Everybody should support it.
To me, it seems like it's a battle between the propagandists and the people who are pushing the ideas of liberty. Now, each side defend themselves with ideas, but I'll tell you what, I believe we do very well on the ideological war. We've been talking about the Patriot Act for a long time, even before it was passed, and for all these years. And when I think back in the 08 campaign and the 12 campaign, it was always a big issue. We get thousands of college students out, and the Patriot Act was well known, and they detested it. And they wanted changes, and they wanted their privacy, and it went on. And yet, Adam already pointed out that the process up there is very difficult, and they get by. But they end up winning the propaganda wars, too. So this is why the infiltration can't be a little bit like we're doing now. Eventually, it has to be, much broader. The professors and the writers and the movies. It has to be an ideological process that engulfs the whole environment. And yet today, when we talk to people, I bet you if people knew all the facts and didn't have to listen to this pure propaganda, I would think it's just like audit the Fed. 80% of them would agree with us, and they're not going to listen to the Cottons of the world, Senator Cotton, who's determined that this is the worst thing for national security, and they demagogue these issues. So I think our job is to win the propaganda war as well as the intellectual war, because it seems like the young people especially responded rather well to our argument for privacy.
Absolutely, that's the key, not just on stopping the mass surveillance, but on stopping the wars and stopping the abuse through police state tactics and so forth. If we want to have success, we have to change minds of enough people around the country.
Adam, I want to thank you for being available today, and get back to work and do some more research for us and keep us straight. But I do want to thank the audience very much for tuning in today. We talk a lot about foreign policy. We're very interested in civil liberties, and this is a civil liberties issue, but the two go together. The bigger the wars, the more attack on civil liberties. It's been known for a long, long time. And guess what? When the war on terrorism started on 9/11, that was the declaration of war. That was a declaration against our liberties, and people succumb so easily. Just think of how they succumbed recently with the propaganda of the tragedy in Paris, as if that was a reason not to try to reform our Patriot Act, and the reason why France and everybody else wants it. And now it looks like they've been able to use that propaganda to get the British to probably support in a vote today to join us in the more killing over there and attacking individuals that will motivate even more terrorism. So I think that civil liberties can be seen very closely related to foreign policy and the war issue, and both will be settled when we understand the nature and the morality of what liberty is all about. That it's the right of the individual to lead their own life, and the right and the lack of authority for governments to provoke us, to control us, to regulate us, to spy on us, and to fight wars that are unnecessary, and then ignore totally the Constitution that was meant there for the protection of liberty, not to police the world and not to make us safe and secure, but to protect liberty, believing sincerely that free people who act responsibly for themselves, are much more capable of providing peace and prosperity for the world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Now, I don't look at the Constitution as something there to protect your liberty. It's more like a blueprint of maybe something that can take a previously ruled upon people and work towards a free society, maybe. And again, it's suggestions basically, to the point where if you look at the Declaration of Independence, basically saying, as a free people, you have the right to overthrow those who basically, I'm paraphrasing, of course, that try to be your masters rather than representatives. And that's the problem. We have masters and not representatives. Now, the problem is, though, those people in charge don't follow the Constitution. If we could move towards the Constitution, we could use that as a stepping stone towards a freer society, as long as we don't start reversing the course back to where we are now. Otherwise, many historians and others say there will be a violent revolution after a major catastrophic collapse of some sort. And what comes out of that, you never know. Um, we could have a total socialist society come out of that. We can have a more libertarian society come out of that. Or we can have literally the exact same thing we have now. And it be used as a fallacy that things have changed, that better people are in these positions, and we steadily continue to grow. But I think there's one thing that a lot of people have left out. Not everybody. There's also a lot of researchers, historians, and philosophers that they look at it from a liberty standpoint, and they look at it from a global standpoint, that you can also have a global government, which I think is probably more likely. I have an update. This is out of LA Times. San Bernardino shootings. Live updates: 14 killed, 2 suspects in custody, and 1 possibly at large after police shootout. The guys opened fired for 30 seconds randomly, then paused to reload. It was 2:45 p.m. when Dennis Perez, 27, called a relative who was waiting outside the Arrowhead Regional Medical Center. As friends and relatives crowd around the phone, they listened as Perez provided details of the shooting. She said the doors of the Environmental Health Services office of San Bernardino County Bernardino County, open, and 2 men dressed all in black, wearing black face masks, entered with big old guns and started shooting randomly. Everyone dropped to the floor. It was during a holiday party. Perez told relatives. The guys opened fire for about 30 seconds randomly, and then paused to reload and began firing again. Perez was hiding under a desk when she was shot once in the lower back. She said the shooters were gone and everything was silent for about 5 minutes, and suddenly the doors were pushed open again, but this time it was law enforcement officers. Lots of them, and they yelled out, "Anyone who can move, leave immediately and find cover behind vehicles." Perez said they were then helped into the beds of pickup trucks and taken to a safer location. Doesn't really get into the 2 suspects. Another update: ABC News, at least 14 killed, 17 injured. Up to 3 shooters opened fire around 11 a.m. at the Inland Regional Center, armed with long guns, and came prepared to do what they did as if they were on a mission, said Police Chief Jared Bergen. Says suspects fled the scene, and hours later police found what they believed to be the getaway car. An exchange of gunfire ensued, and 2 of the suspects were dealt with, and that was in quotes, dealt with, including at least 1 who was shot. Authorities said a 3rd suspect may still be on the run. Video seen of where police and the suspect exchanged gunfire showed what appeared to be one suspect's body lying in a San Bernardino street. The second was removed from the bullet-riddled vehicle. 1 officer suffered non-life-threatening injuries. The initial shooting at the Social Services Center lasted for just a few minutes before the suspects fled. Investigators have not identified a motive. In the course of the investigation, an ATF explosives enforcement officer recovered a suspected pipe bomb. It was not clear where the suspected device was found, but authorities had been checking unidentifiable items in the center. It was not clear if the gunman brought them. They may have been wearing body armor, according to Sergeant Vicky Cervantes. Tragic thing that's happened, and our hearts go out to the victims and their families. And it's going to be sad because we will see this used for reasons that do nothing to honor the people. And fighting against guns will not honor these people, because it wasn't the guns that killed them. It was the people that used any tool to their advantage to hurt others. And we see it over and over. It's funny because you do see the majority of these people that have done these killings, they don't have usually, there's a few cases of it, but for the majority of them, they don't have a long life involvement with guns. And I'm talking about because a lot of these are younger people. Get into your 30s, your 40s, your 50s with guns, and you have maybe one crazy out of how many millions of people. You point out that, few crazies that legally bought guns out of the millions of guns that are sold legally. And then ignore, the gang shootout in New Orleans. Go look that up. I forget if it was 16 or more people. Those aren't legally purchased because they are purchased with the intent on hurting someone. A lot of times they're illegally purchased. But we don't want to talk about that because that doesn't further the agenda that these people have to take your guns. And they keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And I see a lot of people just really getting paranoid or fed up. Just they are at that point where they're like, I just don't care what they think they're going to do. Kiss my butt, I don't care type attitude. And that kind of worries me because it does, to me, seem to signal that a lot of the population that believe in guns and the right to defend yourself and the Second Amendment is that these people are not seeing any option other than just to buckle down and, come and take it type attitude. And I don't want a violent revolution because what I'm seeing doesn't make me feel enthusiastic about what may come of it. Okay, let me see if I can cover this article, if I can get to it before the end of the broadcast. I might not get this. I had to close everything out again. Okay, I'm not finding it right offhand. Thought I had it bookmarked. Might have just been one of the tabs I already had open. And I know I probably could find it here kind of quick. Let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot. I'll at least find it somewhere. From USA Today, Black Friday breaks record with 185,000 gun background checks. Says here more Americans had their backgrounds checked purchasing guns on Black Friday than any day on record, according to data released by the FBI this week. The National Instant Criminal Background Check System processed 185,345 requests on November 27th, one of the largest retail sales days in the country. This was approximate 5% increase over the 175,754 received on Black Friday 2014, wrote Stephen Fisher, the FBI's chief of multimedia productions. The previous high for receipts were 177,170 received on 12/21/2012. Previous spikes for background checks conducted before a gun buyer can obtain a firearm occurred after prominent mass shootings like in December of 2012 in the wake of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Other Black Friday shopping days in 2014, 2013, 2012 occupied the FBI's top 10 list of the most background checks processed in a 24-hour period. Since 1998, FBI data shows that the Bureau has processed requests for more than 220 million firearm purchases. Licensed sellers deny sales to failed background checks based on a variety of factors, including criminal backgrounds, domestic violence convictions, or restraining orders. Friday's purchases came the same day as a mass shooting incident in Colorado Springs that killed 3 people and injured 9 others. On Saturday, President Obama called for tighter controls of weapons of war in the wake of Planned Parenthood shooting. And he's doing the same thing with this one. This is not normal, Obama said. We cannot let it become normal if we truly care about this. If we're going to offer up our thoughts and prayers again for God knows how many times. With a truly clean conscience, then we have to do something about the easy accessibility of weapons of war on our streets to people who have no business wielding them, period. Enough is enough. And they have an interesting chart that you can check out there. And it shows from 1998, the millions for every year. 98 doesn't even look like we were at a million. By 2000, we were somewhere around 7 million, maybe 5 million, in between there. And that kind of plateaued off until 2005. Then it increased about 7.5. Then by 2010, it was closer to about 12.5 mil. By 2013, we're looking at 17.5 mil, according to that. And actually, probably more around 18 mil. And then as of October 31st, we are currently at 17.5 million background checks have been made. USA Today, /story/news/2015/12/01 Black Friday breaks record. Go check it out. We are in a situation where we have to see all the signs that are out there that we are in a world that is changing, and it's being changed in a way that is making security and your livelihoods very unstable. And really what that means is you need to prepare. You need to become somewhat of a prepper, even if it's a little bit. You need to take steps, and it's never too late to start, because if you start now, if you start tomorrow, you're always moving a step ahead of where you are today. So definitely always prepare, and there's a lot of resources. Check out Prepper Chicks. Check out a lot of different prepper sites out there, and find resources that give you a good quality for a decent price. You don't want to go buy cheap stuff for preparing, because last thing you want is something to break in the moment that it could save your life. So don't take shortcuts when it comes to that. One of my sources is Amazon. So check out UCY Amazon store. Go to ucy.tv and scroll down to the bottom. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned here on ucy.tv.